Hi, I'm David Cotton. I'm a father, a brother, a son. I'm a retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General, a former senior executive in the Department of Defense, a corporate vice president, and now a life coach. At the age 59, I told my wife, my kids, and the world, I'm gay. Join me as I talk with others who've made this coming out journey late in life to become who they really are.
You're listening to Out Late with David.
My guest today is a podcaster herself. In fact, she's in the Podcaster Hall of Fame. She's host of the long-running series Graying Rainbows, which features real stories of coming out later in life. A physician, she was married for 38 years and came out at age 60. Today we'll hear her personal coming out story and lots more as I talk with Dr. Ginger Campbell. Well, Ginger, it is wonderful to have you here today.
I'm looking forward to talking.
A few years ago, you invited me to be a guest on your podcast and tell my coming out story.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, I have men who are on their own personal coming out journey, and they reach out to me because they heard me on your show, Graying Rainbows. I'm really honored to have you here to share your story today. So when did you first recognize that you might not be heterosexual?
Let's see, about 1980. When I was 23 or 24-ish. I had a brief affair with a woman. It only lasted, I guess, about a month. But at that time, it was kind of like, well, first of all, in 1980, people really did think that you had a choice, right? So I was like, and I was already married. I'd been married for about 3 years. And
so the 80s was the first time you had that realization or feeling?
Everyone can look back at things that they did when they were a kid. I had a crush on a girl when I was 11. But to be honest with you, I think that having a crush when you're 11 does not prove that you're going to be gay. I think a lot of people blow some of these things out of proportion. For example, being a tomboy does not mean you're going to turn out to be gay. You might, but it's not, like a determinant. I can look back at those things, but I also know people who are straight who had those same experiences and are definitely straight. So I think people like to look back at their past and say, oh, here's all the clues. And maybe yes and maybe no. It depends on the person. That's just my opinion.
I know I've done that as well. I jump in the Wayback Machine and think of things and said, should I have strung those all together to come to a conclusion that I came to later in life? So I understand you're coming from there. Now, you and I grew up in the same time frame, 60s and 70s, because we're about the same generation.
Mm-hmm.
Your religious perspective was at some point in your life was different. Maybe Jehovah's Witness, if I recall. Did that have any impact on your view of sexuality?
Well, yeah, they were very, you have to wait till you're married. So I was a virgin when I got married. So I basically I always tell people I missed the 70s because I was a Jehovah's Witness essentially mostly all of the 70s. So, didn't do any of the things people mostly did in the 70s. The year before I figured out that I might be a lesbian, I actually played on a fast-pitch softball team where I think everyone on the team was lesbian, and I didn't realize it until we went to a softball tournament and got in competitive softball. It's usually double elimination, and we got knocked out early on, and everyone was drunk, and there's like, you like to go to the gay bar? This is 1979. Think Ring My Bell and We Are Family. The lesson I learned was on this day when I realized, oh gosh, the whole team is gay. I already had been on the team for several months, and I had people on the team I liked and people on the team I didn't like. And, I had my own stereotypes. I thought I knew who was gay, but then, I didn't know there was a such thing as femmes. And so I learned two things. One is you can't tell because all kinds of people could be gay. And second, it doesn't matter because you like who you like. Finding out that the whole team was gay did not change who I liked or didn't like on the team.
Well, let's jump back to your husband. You said you were married at the time when you had that relationship. Did you tell him that you were gay or bisexual?
I did. Not in 1980, but sometime in the 90s, I think. We were ultimately married for 38 years,
Hmm.
but he I mean, I wouldn't say he didn't believe me, but he kind of was like, well, he really always seemed to have the position that I should just learn to enjoy sex, which I've learned is a sort of typical guy attitude. But I decided to stay with my husband. He was my best friend. And the person I had the affair with didn't even want to break up with the person she was with. So um, so that was the beginning. Yeah, and around that time, I made my best friend in medical school who was also gay, but in the closet at the time because everyone was. So that was the beginning. And over time, for many years, I just thought that I was bisexual since I loved my husband. I didn't love sex, but I loved my husband. So I self-identified as bisexual, which of course also back then was not cool. And but I just pretty much kept it to myself, except to a few close friends. It wasn't until my husband died in 2015, when I was almost 60, that after about 6 months, I realized, hey, I don't want to spend the rest of my life alone, but I don't think I want to spend it with a man. You know, maybe I am a lesbian. So that's kind of how that happened. And so I came out. It wasn't that big of a deal because at that point, my parents were dead and my sister already had a daughter who was gay. So it wasn't really for my family an issue. And it wasn't for me a big deal at work because I worked at a place that was very, quite a few people in the department I was in. There were people that were gay. And so I didn't really have any big issues with coming out. So for me, the biggest problem is I still haven't met anybody.
More with Dr. Ginger Campbell in just a moment. But first, if you're struggling with coming out late in life, I'd like to recommend a book I found helpful by author Rick Clemens. The book is called Frankly, My Dear, I'm Gay, A Late Bloomer's Guide to Coming Out. Clemens provides tips on navigating a divorce, raising kids as a gay parent, even dating. This is one of the first books I read on my journey of self-discovery and acceptance. The book is part memoir and self-help. Again, the book by Rick Clemens is Frankly, My Dear, I'm Gay.
You're listening to Out Late with David.
You mentioned in your podcast, like one of the hardest things coming out later in life was simply meeting someone. You said it's harder for older gay women that are in long-term relationships, so to find somebody. So what's that space been looking like?
Well, lesbians of our generation who have been out a long time are still very not out. They are not as out as men are. And they have these very closed communities that go back to the time when all these people were school teachers and they would have lost their jobs, right? They had jobs, especially school teachers. And so I think the lesbian community, at least where I live, is much more closed than the gay male community. So that's part of the problem. So I don't have any good solutions for somebody else that's in the situation. I know that people have had success with dating apps. I haven't worked at it hard enough to really say that it couldn't work. I've been, focused on a lot other things.
If you would have come out earlier, just curious as to how the family might have reacted.
I don't think it would have been a big deal just because my younger sister, who unfortunately died last year, she came out like in her teenage years, and it certainly didn't matter to my parents. It wasn't anybody else's business. We never really lived very close to other relatives, so they weren't really part of the picture. For me, I'm just lucky because I know that so many people have to deal with so many family issues. I realize that my story is pretty boring. No professional issues, no family issues.
It is nice that it's not a negative for everyone. And that's a fear that many people have. It's like, I can't come out because the world will hate me. I had a little bit negative things happen, obviously. Doesn't sound like you had many, if any at all.
Yeah. I mean, I live in Alabama. It's actually more, it's worse to be an atheist than it is to be LGBT, and I'm an atheist. So the only trouble I've ever had is from coming out as an atheist.
Interesting. Local norms and culture to what that does. So you had no
Now,
problems at
that's not
work.
to say that Alabama's not, busy trying to make its own road of anti, LGBT laws, but in the everyday culture, it's not. I mean, it was a side effect of AIDS that during the AIDS epidemic, a lot of guys went home from New York and San Francisco and the other big cities. They went home. A lot of them went home to the South to die. Okay, which meant that people just finally had to realize, yes, they're mostly sons. Some of them really were gay. I think that was probably the biggest factor that changed attitudes, is just knowing people. I mean, it's very well known that any minority group, once you actually know an individual, your attitude changes. So
I guess for our listeners, I just want them to also take away that you can come out and not have a whole bunch of negative impacts in your life. And it depends on the situation. There'll be changes.
Right. And what I learned from Graying Rainbows and all the people I interviewed is that a lot of times the thing that the person is most fearing is not the thing that happens. It's something they get blindsided by something else. For example, and I think you may remember this, a lot of people, the person they think is going to be their supporter is the person who freaks out, and the person that they think is going to be a problem can turn out to be their supporter. And the other thing is you got to give people time, because even though you might think, oh, it's obvious, and you're going to tell them and they're just going to go, oh, great, I've known it all along. Maybe not. Maybe they're going to be shocked and surprised and need time. So even if a person reacts negatively, it's really important, if that's a person you care about, that you don't burn the bridges, right? That you leave the door open for the future, even if, and I mean, it can take years for people to come to grips with this. So overreacting to your family's reaction can do you more harm than good.
I would agree. So in 2006, you launched a podcast called Brain Science, which is one of the top-rated medical podcasts in iTunes. What prompted you to start a podcast about coming out later in life called Graying Rainbows?
As a longtime podcaster, I'm a big believer that podcasting is a wonderful way to communicate with people. And also, when I got ready to come out in 2015, I looked for podcasts, and it was really hard to find them, and they seemed to disappear as quickly as they came. There's a great need, and more people will are looking to podcasts to find out whatever it is they want to know about. So that's the reason. And then I decided, if I'm not going to do this at this point in my life, when will I do it? I mean, I wasn't in a position of, vulnerability. I had no excuse.
How did you find the stories of the people that you invited?
I started out by interviewing people who had written books, like the well-respected lesbian historian Lillian Faderman and Lauren Olson, for example. So I started out by doing that, interviewing people who had written books, and then they gave me leads to other people. Lauren was great, gave me some really great leads. And then I started getting emails from listeners and started to use those, because I realized that the stories were what was really resonating with people. And so it went in that direction, because that seemed to be what was the most powerful, was the stories.
When you talked about Graying Rainbows, I believe when you interviewed yourself, basically like episode 3 or something, you talked about building a sense of community. Did you build that community you were looking for?
Well, that's a very interesting question. The group that I started, that was on Facebook and went to MeWe for privacy, turned out to have a little core of gay guys, and that really were very supportive of each other. And one of them actually took me out to dinner and gave me some sweet flowers and cards from the other guys. But there were never very many women on that group for whatever reason. I think that part of the problem was it turned out that a very core group of listeners were the people who weren't really out yet. They were just thinking about it. And I think I came to appreciate that I might have talents, but community building does not appear to be one of them. I'm grateful for the people who have that talent.
As a life coach, I'm committed to help you discover the passions in your life and help you map a course to achieve the things you really want. Together, we will unwind those persistent self-doubts that are holding you back. You'll begin to see your passions more clearly and set achievable goals. Throughout your journey, I'll be there to challenge and encourage you in moving forward to discover your authentic self. For more information about my personal life coaching services, or to arrange a complimentary consultation, visit davidcottoncoaching.com.
You're listening to Out Late with David.
So in the years of doing Graying Rainbows, what are some of the lessons you learned about coming out later in life?
Well, I think I sort of touched on two of them, which is your expectations will probably be surprised, that the person you expect to be a problem may be supportive and the person you expect to be supportive may freak out. But whichever way it goes, you've got to give people time. And I think it was Rick Clemens who pointed out that when you come out, you've probably been stewing over it for years, right? But your family member hasn't. And so they feel blindsided. And this is especially true if you are in a relationship and it's your spouse. So you have to realize whoever you're telling, even if you might think it's obvious, they probably don't think it's obvious, and they may be shocked even though you might think they're not going to be. Now, this was not my personal experience, because I was the person who people always assumed was gay when I thought I was straight. But for most people, their families and friends may be surprised, and don't be surprised if they're surprised. That's the first thing. And then don't assume that the person's reaction is their final reaction. Like I said, don't burn any bridges. Mm-hmm. If it's a person that you want to stay in your life, then you have to be the one who leaves the door open. Now, it might be a person you don't care about and you just let it go, and that's fine too. But, if it's a parent or other person you really love and you'd like to keep them in your life, then patience is how you get rewarded. And this is, again, thing I learned especially from the ex-Mormon person that I interviewed, and how her parents had come around, but it took them years to do it. So
I can say the opposite can happen too. You may get a positive, welcoming response, and then as the person has a time to think about it, it can become a negative pushback response to when they really come to grips with their own emotions, and not just that initial having the 600 pounds of bricks dropped on their head.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, my own personal experience is so relatively limited that I try to go more from what I've learned from my guests than I do from my own experience, because it is such a unrepresentative, I think, of many people's experience. But for coming out later in life, I think the other thing I learned from guests, women in particular tend to be really worried about their kids. And kids are growing up in today's world. So unless you happen to be in a certain conservative group, your kids are probably already more open-minded than you think. What kids have trouble with is the idea of divorce. So they are going to be more worried about what's going to happen with your relationship with mom or dad than they are about the fact that you're gay. And so when you are trying to figure out how you're going to do things with your spouse, if you've got kids, that's for most people going to be the number one priority. So sometimes people wait, they don't come out publicly until later because they think that's the best thing for the kids. That may be true, but it's not, because the kids need to be protected from the information.
Yeah, it's the circumstance or situation where they might be.
Right. And only you know what your particular situation is.
Well, based on hearing all that experience from your guests, Did it ever make you reflect back and say, I wish I would have done this differently in my life?
No, it just made me grateful that my life was really pretty simple. My professional identity was not at any way threatened by coming out. There's people like one of my very first guests was a trans woman who was a psychologist, who said that when she came out, she was willing to lose everything because she knew that that was a possibility, and she did it knowing she might lose everything. And I mean, that's, I can't say that I could have made the choice that she made. I mean, that's real courage. I mean, the choice that I made when I decided to come out was not, it was pretty much a no-brainer, no risk kind of situation. But there's a lot of people that are in much more complicated, much more high-risk situations. And that's why I think we should never say, well, everybody needs to be out. That, only you, the person, can decide, what it's worth to you. What are you missing that what are you going to, it's a trade-off of what you might lose against what you might gain. Like when I decided to really made a final decision to stay with my husband, which was in about 10 years before he died, I decided, this is the logic I used, I decided that his friendship, he was still my best friend after all those years, that his friendship, and we actually decided this together because, I mean, it was about our marriage and its strengths and weaknesses. We decided that it was better to stay in our relationship with what we had, our friendship, than to break our marriage up for the sake of something that we might find elsewhere. And this was really a two-person decision because I'm sure he wasn't totally satisfied either. But we made that decision really together. We went through a stormy period and made that decision together that we were going to stay together. But I just felt like, here I have this, this guy who loves me for the person I am. So sex is not the best thing ever, but he's still, my best friend. I still love him. And so I made the decision that what I had was more valuable than what I might have. But another person could be in a horrible relationship, right? And so then maybe what they're giving up is not such a big deal. David, I do want to say one thing. I've met a lot of women who were in these really bad marriages. They don't want to come out because of, they feel guilty. They feel guilty about being gay. But the guilt that I've seen in women about this just, to me, is unfathomable, but it's so ubiquitous that I realize it is normal. So,
it makes me wonder if they have some internalized homophobia, and it's...
Well, I mean, that's what the counselors in this area talk about. They always talk about internalized homophobia. I think I honestly don't experience internalized homophobia, so it's another one of those things that I go, okay, yeah, I guess that's a thing, but I guess I'm weird. But I mean, the first time I heard about the fact that some women could be homosexual, I was about 15, and somebody said, "Oh, that basketball coach and those players are queer," because this was the 70s, and that was a slur, but that's what they said. And I said, "Huh? Well, they can't get you pregnant, so what are you worried about?" I mean, I just didn't get it. It's like, why do I care?
Is there anything else you'd like to share that we have not already covered?
Well, I hope that people will listen to Graying Rainbows. I think our shows are very complimentary. And one of the funny things that people always tell me when they do is that they start out, like the guys will start out listening to just the guys, and then they'll go back and listen to the other stories. And one of the things I have learned is that people, and I didn't really learn this from doing Graying Rainbows, but it was emphasized by this. When you listen to somebody else's story, you can always learn something, even if you have nothing in common with them. If you can listen with an open mind, you can always find something to connect with in that person. And that's why having people share their stories, as I'm sure you're learning too, is so powerful. It's a gift to the people that are listening, but it's also a gift to the person who gets to share their story.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and insights. Each episode provided me information that was comforting when I needed the most, when I was coming to terms with my own reality of who I was. I knew I was not alone. You were there. You'd be in my car. I'm driving. I was in my safe space. And there was Dr. Campbell with her episodes. So
it's humbling to have touched that many people, because as a physician, you want to make a difference in people's lives. And it's humbling to realize that you can do it without even ever meeting each other. And that's the power of podcasting, and why those of us who've been doing it at, the way you and I do it, not to make, a bunch of money or anything like that, but to make a difference for other people. And so I'm proud of you, David. I'm proud of you.
Well, thank you. And telling you thank you seems insufficient. I shall be forever grateful. So, Ginger, thank you for spending this time with us today.
Thanks, David.
Coming out at any time in your life is seldom an easy process. Ginger said something today that really bears repeating. The initial reaction of family or friends to someone coming out may not reflect how they really feel over time. They may be supportive, disappointed, or even angry. But even if the person reacts negatively, and if that is a person you care about, Ginger cautioned, don't burn any bridges with them. Leave the door open for the future, because for some, acceptance just takes time. Overreacting to a negative response could permanently close the door on an important relationship. I think that's great advice. For me, Dr. Ginger Campbell's podcast, Graying Rainbows, was a key resource because she invited guests on the program who told their unique stories of coming out later in life. And while Graying Rainbows is no longer being produced, Ginger's library of episodes can be found wherever you find your podcasts, and will provide a wealth of information and support even now. In the meantime, it is my intent to carry this torch forward and introduce you to even more people who've made the hard choices and pursued a life that is authentic and true for them. We hope you'll follow us and listen along to learn and grow together on this journey of discovery and reflection. That's it for now. I'm David Cotton. Join us next time for Out Late with David.
To hear more episodes, visit outlatewithdavid.com. And to learn more about personal life coaching services, go to davidcottoncoaching.com.